Hello. I'm going to give you a lesson on changing between different forms of numbers. Okay, and this is going to cover decimals, fractions, and percents. All right, I'm going to share my screen with you guys here. Okay. All right, a key to this lesson is understanding and remembering what place value is. Okay, fractions can be changed to decimals, and decimals can be changed to fractions. All right, again, place value is important, and it's how we organize our numbers in the base 10 system we use. All right, so for instance, if we have a dollar amount, I'm just going to put any sort of random dollar amount here. Let's go with, say, 400, or wait, 7. Just putting some random numbers here. Nothing special about them. All right, so $4,762.13. Okay. All right, now a question. Why are the place values of tenths and hundredths called such? Excuse me. Okay, before we get to tenths and hundredths, though, we need to figure out, hey, what do we call these where this 4 is, where this digit 4, what's this place value called? Okay, and if you recall, this is called the thousands. Thousands, okay. And this is called the hundreds. And this is called the tens. And we have the ones. Okay. Now this is back, again, place value. We had to have a name for the digits in this column, right? The digits in this column, the digits in this column. So we call them ones, tens, hundreds, thousands. And that makes sense because, hey, this is 2 1. If we're thinking money, we'd have 2 $1 bills. All right, if we're thinking this number here, then we'd have 6 $10 bills and 2 $1 bills. So tens makes sense, okay. And if we could have 7 $100 bills, okay, 6 tens. So that makes sense, right? Now, what was this one called? This one might trip up some of you. Might think it's called the once, but it's not. Okay, called the tenths. Okay, kind of like in money, we're talking about dimes. How many dimes you've got? Okay, and why is it called tenths? Well, down here, it's because, hey, you need 10 pennies, right, to make a dime. Okay, tenths, or in other words, probably a better way to think of this is why it's called the tenths, is we need 10 tenths to make a whole one. Okay. But we have to distinguish it from this 10, okay? Because this is 10 wholes, right? This is 10 parts of a whole. So we call it tenths. Okay? And then this one's called the hundreds. Hundredths with TH. Again, to distinguish it from here, this is where we have 100 ones. This is where we're talking about parts, 100 parts to make a whole. We need 100 pennies to make $1 bill. Okay. So parts and wholes. That's what the decimal separates. It separates our parts and it separates our wholes. So why are they called that? To distinguish from the tens and hundreds, which represent wholes. Okay. Tenths and hundredths represent parts of a whole. And okay, label the place value to the right of the decimal of the fraction. Okay, so if we know that this is parts here, all right, then we can represent this, if it's parts of a whole, we can represent it as a fraction, right? Because that's what a fraction really is. Okay, so if I were to insert a fraction here, what would it be in terms of this particular number we have? Well, the bottom number has to be how many parts we need to make a whole. And we've already talked about this. You need 10 parts to make a whole, so 10 is going to be on bottom. Well, how many parts do we actually have? Well, we've got 1. Okay, so if I were to represent this 1/10 as a fraction, I'd represent it as 1 over 10. All right, what about this guy here? If I represent this hundredths, 3 hundredths, I have to have 100 parts to make a whole. And how many do I actually have? I have 3. All right, I'm going to add a line right here. So I'm going to represent, there's a way to represent everything to the right of the decimal place in one fraction. Okay, and it's pretty simple. You just go to the furthest point to the right the rightmost digit, and you use that as your bottom number. So in other words, furthest most is going to be the 3, and that's in the hundredths place. Okay, and then you can put all the digits that are to the right of the decimal place as your top number, your numerator. In other words, I'm kind of adding these together under one fraction, 13 100ths. That makes sense because we're thinking in terms of pennies. If we could say we have 1 dime and 3 pennies, or we could say we have 13 pennies. Okay, so I just want to show you a way to write that is both ways. So that's how we go from decimals to a fraction. Okay, decimals to a fraction. Later on, we'll talk about, hey, what if we don't want a denominator of 10, 100, 1000? Okay, this goes on to thousands, 10,000s. Okay, what if we don't want that as a denominator? How do we change a decimal to a fraction other than a power of 10 as a denominator? We'll talk about that later. Okay, that is possible. All right. What about decimals to fractions? Okay, so we got a decimal here, 0.24, and we've got some whole numbers as well, 12 wholes. Okay, so we got some wholes and we got some parts. All right. Now, how do I change this to a mixed number fraction? Well, what is a mixed number fraction? First of all, what's a mixed number? Okay, so I'm going to type in here what a mixed number is. Okay. All right, a mixed number has wholes and parts. Parts are written as a fraction. So, in other words, we're going to change this to a mixed number fraction. We've got to take our wholes and we just leave them the same, 12 wholes. Okay, but then we've got to change this 0.24. Instead of as a decimal, we're going to write it as a fraction. All right. How do we do that? Well, we just talked about it a second ago here. We look at the digit that's to the furthest to the right, and that's a 4. What place value is that in? It's in the hundredths. So my fraction's going to have 100 on bottom. And then I look at the digits to the right of the decimal, all of them, and I copy them as my numerator, 24 100ths. Okay. All right, now what I didn't talk about last time is, hey, this is actually a fraction that can be reduced here. Okay. So instead of 24 hundredths, these are both even numbers. I can certainly reduce them by 2, or I can, by a factor of 2, I can divide the top and the bottom by 2. So I'm going to keep my 12 just so I don't forget about it. I'm going to divide the top by 2 and the bottom by 2. Okay, and I get 12 50ths. They're still both even numbers, so I can still even go more than that. Keep my 12. And 12 divided by 2 is 6. 50 divided by 2 is 25. Okay. All right, now I have my simplified mixed number fraction. All right, here's another example. Let's change this mixed number to a decimal. Okay, so this decimal number to a mixed number fraction. So I have 223 here. Keep that the same. And then I just change the 0.7 to a fraction. Now that only goes out to the tenths place, so I only need a 10 at the bottom. And the only digit is the 7, so 7 tenths. And I can't reduce or simplify that fraction, so my answer is as it is, 223 and 7 tenths. All right, well, what about going from now a fraction to a decimal? So we've gone from a decimal to a fraction. Okay. What about how do we go from a fraction to a decimal? All right. So this one, if you notice, is over 100. So you should kind of start to think and realize that, hey, that's the same thing then as 3 wholes. And my fraction and my decimal here, sorry, decimal, okay. Now I have 23 100ths. So I can just 23 because this goes out to the hundredths place and I've got 23 of them. Like 23 pennies, right? Pretty simple. All right, this one here, 5. Okay, and I'm going out to the tenths place, and I have 5 of them, so 5.5. These ones are pretty simple, straightforward. All right, what about this one though? This does not have a power of 10 on the denominator, so I can't just go 5.1, okay, because this isn't tenths. These are halves, okay? Well, what does this hint say? If the fraction does not have a power of 10 for a denominator, look at the fraction problem as a division problem. Divide the top number by the bottom number in your calculator. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go 5, and then to figure out what's to the right of the dot, okay, I'm going to kind of write this on a different line here. I'm going to take 1 divided by 2, and first it's going to give me, and then I'm going to put that 0.5 right down there. So 5.5. Here, I'll write it this way, maybe. Makes sense here. I'll keep it the way it is. 5.5. Okay. So again, look, every fraction can be or thought of as a division problem. Okay, so if you want to change it to a decimal, it's pretty simple. Just take 1 divided by 2. You could do the same thing up here, 5 divided by 10, and in your calculator would give you the same answer. Or 23 divided by 100, it'd still give you this decimal number. Okay. All right, what about 5 and 2/5? So take 2 divided by 5, and you should get 4. Okay, so I think we've got the fraction to decimals and decimals to fraction thing down. What about our percents? To change percentages to fractions, you drop the percent sign and put the number part of the percent over what? All right, let's answer this question if I ask you another question. All right, remember the fractions are thought of as parts over wholes. Okay. Decimals, we have our wholes on the left and our parts of a whole on the right. All right, fraction or percentages. How does this work with parts and wholes? Percentages, okay, have a part on top or a part first, right? But what is the whole percent? What does it mean when I say I have the whole thing when I'm talking about percents? Think about a test. If you get all the problems right, how much do you have? 100%. Okay. So a percent really is a specialized fraction. Okay. What I mean by that is it's a fraction, a number that you put over 100. That's why I'm saying to change percentages to fractions, you drop the percent sign and put the number part of the percent over 100. Because really percents are just a specialized fraction. They're comparing some number to 100. Okay, and 100 being the whole amount, everything that you could have. All right, so change 25% to a fraction. Well, if you understand that really percents are a specialized type of fraction, you can just write this as 25 over 100. Okay, because the whole is 100, and we've got 25 of them, okay, or 25 parts to that whole, I should say. So 25 over 100. And then don't forget, this is a reducible fraction, so I can divide the top by 25 and the bottom by 25, and I get 1/4. All right, what about 4%? Okay, same idea. Gonna put it 4 over 100, and I can reduce that to 4 divided by 4 is 1, 100 divided by 4 is 25. All right, what about this one? 11.5%. This one's a little bit trickier, okay, because we're showing the decimal here and the fraction. Okay, but again, it's just this number over 100. And this is a little quirky, right? Okay, this is a little weird how we're going to deal with this. So there's two ways you can really think about this. All right, I'm going to come back to this. Okay, we'll come back to this problem to see if we can't simplify and clean this up a little bit after we go over here. So that's percentages or fractions. All right, what about percentages to decimals? Okay, you drop the percent sign and move the decimal place 2 spots to the blank. All right, there's a rule. This is kind of the rule. Change 25% to a decimal. Okay, so I'm going to delete these here just so we can do this ourselves. All right, 25% to decimal. Okay, I said drop the percent sign and move the decimal place 2 spots which direction. All right, so how do we know which direction? All right, so let's think about this here. If I were to change this to a fraction, 5 over 100. Okay. So then, knowing what we do about fractions to decimals, we'd have 0 point, and how many 400s do we have? We've got 25. What did I do to the decimal place? Well, there is no decimal place here, Mr. Jenny. Actually, there is. Okay, we just don't usually write it. It comes after the wholes, right? We got 25 whole percents. Don't confuse that. Okay, I know that's a little quirky, but 25, okay, and the decimal place comes after the 25. And then what we do to get rid of this percent sign, to change it to where it's just a decimal number, not a percent, okay, we move the decimal place 2 spots to the left, and then we get rid of the percent sign. Okay. Another way you could think about it is change it to a fraction, 25 over 100. And then change it to a decimal. So if you want to go percent, fraction, decimal, because it makes more sense to do it, the shortcut way is just, hey, take this decimal place, move it 2 spots to the left, and get rid of the percent sign. All right, so again, the decimal is here. It's just we don't usually show it. We're going to move it 2 spots to the left. Be careful here. It is not 0.4. It is 0.4. So I have to move the decimal place 2 spots to the left. Okay. All right. Now, question for you. What if I had a decimal to a percent? So what if I were to go backwards here? Okay. Back to percent. What would I have to do? Well, let's do the opposite. Okay, I'm taking the decimal place. Instead of moving it 2 to the left, I'm moving it 2 to the right. And I end back up with, and then add the percent sign. Okay. So to change percentage to decimals, you move it to the left. Change from percent, or sorry, decimal to percent, move to the right. All right, let's go back up to here, see if we can work with this one now that we know a little bit more about this. Okay, change 11.25 to a fraction. All right, we put it over 100. Now, what if we were to change this to a decimal before we change it to a fraction? Okay, so we learned how to do that right here, right? Change a percent to a decimal and move the decimal place 2 spots to the right, left. Okay, so if I were to first go, I would get 0.11, sorry, 0.115. Okay, move this decimal 1, 2, then I can get rid of the decimal, or get rid of the percent. 1, 2, get rid of this percent. All right, now I have this, and it might be easier now to see, hey, this actually doesn't go out to the hundredths place. This goes all the way out to the thousandths place. And I don't need that dot now, that decimal point. Back up there here. And then I could reduce this fraction, because I can see that, hey, it's got a power of factor of 5, can go on the top and the bottom. So I take my calculator and I go 115 divided by 5. That gives me 23. And then 100 divided by 5, I believe is going to give me, or 1,000 divided by 5 is going to give me 200. Okay, weird fraction, but that's what 11.5% is as a fraction, 23 200ths. All right, so quick recap. Started with place value. Okay, really understanding, hey, what are these digits? Why do we put them in the columns that we put them in? And we corresponded that to, hey, this can also be thought of as the tenths, 1/10, or however many you have over 10, however many you have over 100. All right. So then we can change any decimal to a fraction pretty easy by putting it over either 100 or 10 or whatever it is, and then reducing it. And we can go from a fraction to a decimal by taking the top number divided by the bottom number. Top number divided by the bottom number. We talked about percents, how a percent is a specialized type of fraction where it's the whole is, or you need 100 of the percents to make a whole. Okay. And if we have 25 of them, that means we've got 25 over 100. All right. And then we talked about, hey, how do we go from percents to decimals? And that's where the shortcut way, the way to think about it quickest is just to move the decimal place around. Okay, however many, if you're going from percents to decimals, you move it to the left. You're going from decimals to percents, you move it to the right. All right, if you have further questions, go ahead and re-watch this video, but that's all I've got for you. Thank you for listening.